Beloved, let me tell you something. If I'm the black sheep of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, it's because I've been screaming for 24 years that there's something diabolically wrong at the top of this church. If I've accused the leadership of anything, it's been the twin sins of silence and hoarding. Why? Because I'm a watchman. I prefer the term watchdog. It don't bother me. The Syrophoenician woman in Matthew 15 didn't flinch when Jesus called her a dog. You can call me a dog too, as long as God gives me a tongue to bark. It's my duty to bark. What did God tell Ezekiel in chapter 3, verses 17 to 19? Son of man, I have made you a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore hear the word at my mouth and give them warning from me. When I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, and you give him not warning, nor speak to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life. The same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at your hand. That's God talking. Yet if you warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul. And what did Mrs. White have to say about this? In Testimonies for the Church, volume 8, page 304, we read this, quote, the Lord is soon coming. The watchmen on the walls of Zion are called upon to awake to their God-given responsibilities. God calls for watchmen. Watchmen who in the power of the Spirit will give to the world the last warning message, who will proclaim the time of night. He calls for watchmen, that's you and I, beloved, who go to church Sabbath after Sabbath and a prayer meeting. Those of us who sing on the choir. He calls for watchmen who will arouse men and women from their lethargy, lest they sleep the sleep of death. Watchmen, that's what we are, every last one of us. Watchmen. Jude tells us that we should strive earnestly to protect the faith, to defend the faith once given unto us. That, my friend, is what led us to publish this book, The New Illustrated Great Controversy, in 1990. I did it by the grace of God. Our ministry did it because I'm a watchman and I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what led us to insert some 450 photographs in this book. Okay? Most of them, or a whole lot of them, clearly showing the pagan roots of the Roman Catholic Church. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, we inserted 450 of them across this book. All right? With fantastic results. I can remember somebody wrote in from the Presbyterian Church who had received this book. And he said that they were having communion on a particular Sunday. And when he saw the round wafer, he almost threw it out and, created a scene in the church. Why? Because he had not known that the round wafer represented the S-U-N, not the S-O-N. This is pagan sun worship that has made its way into the church of God. And that's a Presbyterian who wrote us to tell us that. Yes, the pictures have had good effect, and our DVDs and tapes have. All right? But that is a concept that led us to insert this ad. Not only the book, but this ad for the Great Controversy. All 6 pages of it. Page 1 is a picture of Ellen White. I commissioned that portrait to be painted. All right? Artist Luis Drapiza in Orlando, Florida. There's a nice story behind it. Page 2, we focused on the health message and showed how Sister White was in some cases 100 years ahead of the science of her day. She speaks about electricity in the brain, for example, long before they discovered that there are indeed little electric waves emanating from our brain. Yet she had it, the Seventh-day Adventist Church had it in its literature from the 1860s. Why? Because she said God showed her. Whatever disrupts the flow of electricity in the brain tends to weaken and hurt us. Turn the page. This center spread, it might not be the most graphically appealing. I wanted a picture of the church raping the Constitution. So I needed a church with a steeple. You get the picture. tearing through the Constitution of the United States. That's what she says is coming. That the church will succeed in getting the Constitution of this country repudiated and itself in the driver's seat as the leading voice in this country. God showed her. It's in the great controversy, but of course it's been stripped from this book. Okay? And finally, the last 2 pages, we highlight what some of the Protestant leaders were saying at the time. Jerry Falwell, victory is not a matter of if, but when. And I think Pat Robertson's quote here, the Constitution of the United States is a marvelous document for self-government by Christian people. We have enough votes to run this country, and when the people say we have had enough, we are going to take over. That's precisely what she said is coming, based on the prophecies of the book of Revelation. And of course, the last page here, we didn't want to identify the person here, but we got an actor to play the part of Paul Harvey, who has come on the air, or had come on the air, he's gone now, time and time again, lauding the works of Mrs. White. This was our ad, and what did we get for our trouble? Our ministry was almost wiped out. Wiped out. Lincoln Steed knows who was behind it, but I suppose that for a peaceful life, he'll never tell me. But he did say he told one of the movers and shakers that he could be sued because of what he was doing. They did everything to wipe our ministry out. I'm telling you, and that's one of the reasons why I think God has allowed me to live, so that I can connect the dots for you. That you understand it's not just great hope. It's not just the church hymnal. It's not just the awarding of a medal to the Pope. There is a strong streak, and I believe there is a whole flotilla of Roman Catholic agents in our midst doing everything they can to muzzle this church and keep it quiet. We're going to be talking about your tithe in a minute. Who has it? Where is it going? Are you sure? And that's what I'm trying to do today as a watchman, to awake God's people as from sleep. To point out that there's not just one fox, but probably, as I said a while ago, a whole flotilla, hundreds of them in the hen house. Let me say it again. I believe there are Jesuit devils in our midst who, for all intents and purposes, are running key committees in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And it doesn't matter that I might be scoffed at while barking either. It doesn't bother me. I'm not in any popularity contest. I'm accustomed to being the lone wolf. You don't have to like me. You don't have to love me. All you need are 2 ears, and I've done my job. Barking is my duty. Besides, we've got wonderful precedent for it. In the 1930s, Winston Churchill was routinely booed for his warnings about the intentions of Herr Hitler, as he called Adolf Hitler. In a speech given at the House of Commons in November 1932, I can recite it backward and forward for you. He predicted all these bands of sturdy Teutonic youth marching through the streets and towns of Germany with the light of desire in their eyes to suffer for the fatherland. They're not after status. They are looking for weapons. And when they have them, believe me, they will then ask for the return of lost territories, lost colonies. William Manchester, in his book, The Last Lion, refers to Churchill in those years as a prophet in exile. Britain couldn't take his barking, but he kept on barking. And in the end, you know what happened. When Chamberlain, on that ill-fated trip to Munich to try and sit down with Hitler, you know, that whole fiasco, when Britain realized that they were being run by a coward and war was inevitable, who did they turn to? The one who was barking all this time. So we have precedent. You won't shut me up by threatening me. You won't just shut up David Mould by disfellowshipping me. I'll probably bark louder when it comes. I'll bark till I drop, or until the church finally wakes up, throws off its lethargy, and begins to protest in earnest. So David, you say, how can you accuse the church of silence? Isn't it growing by leaps and bounds? Yes, it's growing. But how much of it is the work of the clergy, and how much of it is the work of the laity? And how much of the church's money is really being spent? That's a question I put to Ted Wilson in that meeting I mentioned a while ago. He had given me the audience, and I'd flown to Washington, Silver Spring actually, to meet with him. Among the issues we discussed was a gift of close to $100 million that the church had received from one member. One of my agents, so to speak, tipped me off. I discovered it. Somebody in Texas called me and told me about it, and I was able to get to another General Conference worker, and he confirmed the story. The check wasn't quite $100 million, it was in the 90s. but call it for all intents and purposes $100 million. And I said to Ted Wilson, Ted, what happened to that money? This was before he was General Conference President. What happened to that money? You know, I haven't read of any of our third world pastors, the ones riding around in bicycles. Has the General Conference given them cars? You got enough money to buy a whole fleet of cars. Has anybody gotten a raise? What happened to that money? $100 million, one man's tithe. If I'm not mistaken, his face turned a little red. That's Ted. And he answered me. He said those funds had been distributed among the divisions. Now, if I know my church, it's God's church, but I'm calling it my church. I'm a member of the church. If I know my church, what that means is that those funds have gone into some bank or some vault or some fund that we, the rank and file members, will never hear a word about. I remember asking the church's former top auditor, David Dennis, about stuff like this, and he told me, frankly, it would be next to impossible to find out the real wealth of the church. It is that closely guarded. That suggests to me that much of it is hidden, stashed away somewhere, and that's one of the reasons why I'll bark till I drop. There's something diabolically wrong with this. We have a world to warn, and somewhere, probably inside some vault, in some Swiss bank, instead of turning those funds loose upon the laity so that we can run with this message, we have some secret committee busy counting money. I know as a child growing up in Jamaica, we used to have this nursery rhyme. The king was in his counting house. You know the rest of it. Counting up his what? His money. That's what this church is doing. Why do you think we're called Laodicea? The first words out of Laodicea's mouth. Go read it in your Bible for yourself. Revelation 3. I am rich. And it's been fulfilled upon the Seventh-day Adventist Church. As for the sin of silence, remember now I said there are two sins that I've accused the church of. I haven't gone into the personal lives of its members. Two sins, silence and hoarding. So let's turn to the sin of silence. When Coca-Cola or Apple or Microsoft or Toyota want to reach the masses, what do? They advertise. On September 17th, 1981, in the pages of the Review, in an article written by attorney Warren Johns, we find the claim that if the Seventh-day Adventist Church were put into the Fortune 500, we would rank among the top 50. Well, why don't we function like a Fortune 500 company? Why don't we invest a sizable amount of the church's vast hoarded income into a well-thought-out advertising budget? If we really want to bring the great controversy to the masses, don't pretend. Don't pretend by printing trash, and so so you get to say you have distributed 140 million copies of not even toilet paper. Why not produce a quality version that would totally captivate the reader? Here's what Inspiration has to say on the subject of advertising. It's from this book, Evangelism, but I'm going to put it up on your screen. We must take every justifiable means of bringing the light before the people. Let the press, she said, be utilized. This is over 100 years ago. God's prophet is calling for the press to be utilized. Let every advertising agency be employed that will call attention to the work. You ever heard of the internet? Do you know what one well-placed internet ad can do? My God, where's the brains of this church? Where's the will? I'm telling you again, the biggest obstacle to the advancement of the work of God is the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. They have the brains, they have the money, but they're as quiet as a pack of church mice. Instead, what we have is this charade to make you think they're doing something when they're doing nothing. This should not be regarded as non-essential, she said. On every street corner, you may see placards and notices calling attention to various things that are going on, some of them of the most objectionable character. And shall those who have the light of life be satisfied with feeble efforts to call the attention of the masses to the truth? That's Evangelism, page 130. You simply cannot convince me that the church doesn't have the brains for an advertising campaign that would capture the attention of the world. I know my puny brain could do it. For all the world wants to know what is coming. Pitch Ellen White. Don't be embarrassed. As a prophet of God, bring forth the things she predicted, as we attempted to do in 1990 in Time magazine. Get it in the right hands, in the right format, and don't be apologetic for it. And the world will read. I remember after the Desert Storm, Saddam Hussein, you know what happened? I remember reading it in a USA Today. There was a run on any book having to do with Armageddon. Bookstores were empty of anything pertaining to Armageddon. People weren't sure what was coming and they wanted to read. You know what that tells me? Every last one of us wants to know what's coming. I was having a Bible study not 2 days ago with a man who just lost his wife 9 months ago. What was on his heart? Where was she and where were her friends? They want to know, what does the Bible say? And as for the brains in this church, I know they could pull off a campaign. The only thing they lack are the funds. Those helping us with our internet presence have insisted we need to engage our viewers with a strong call to action. Trouble is, they've told me to keep it short. Well, the others we shot might be short, but for reasons that will soon be abundantly clear, this one won't be. You see this magazine in my hands? This is not just paper and pictures. It's almost like I'm holding a living, breathing child. Why? This is my baby. I wrote every sentence in this ad, placed every comma and every photograph. Well, that's not strictly true. Let me give credit where credit is due. One thing I didn't do was the center spread. I designed it, but one of our workers at the time, how you doing, Buffy, actually built it. We then took this photograph of it and made it our center spread. Beloved, if God could step back after 6 days of labor and after surveying his creation declare it very good, then so can I. God took pride in his work, so do I. Let me tell you 2 quick things about this ad. First, it mentions Islam 11 years before 911. Do you hear me? I said 11 years before 911, we put Islam into the discussion about an emerging theocracy in the United States. Who do you think was guiding us? 2, beyond this, you could use these 6 pages to introduce Ellen White to thinking people anywhere in the world. After reading only 1 page, this page, any thinking person would be able to see that she was no ordinary woman. Mrs. White clearly possessed insights into the working of the human body that not even the scientists of her day had. Imagine the audacity of writing about electricity in the brain long before the science of electroencephalography was discovered. While the study of the electrical impulses in the brains of rabbits and monkeys goes back to writings first published by the British physician Richard Caton in 1875, if you go to the encyclopedia and look up electroencephalography in man, you'll see the first human measurements of those impulses being attributed to the German physiologist and psychologist Hans Berger in 1924. The truth of the matter, however, is this. Thanks to the great health reform vision given to Mrs. White in Otsego, Michigan in June 1863, we Seventh-day Adventists had this phenomenon in our literature before them both. Here is what Mrs. White wrote in volume 2 of the Testimonies in 1869. Quote, "Whatever disturbs the circulation of the electric currents in the nervous system lessens the strength of the vital powers, and the result is a deadening of the sensibilities of the mind." End quote. That, beloved, is what we Seventh-day Adventists enjoy as part of our legacy. Baptists didn't have it, Lutherans didn't have it, Methodists didn't have it, nor Catholics, nor Jews, nor Buddhists, nor Hindu. We were ahead of the game, ahead of science, and ahead of the political scientists and politicians struggling to keep our planet on even keel. Others might guess, but thanks to another set of visions that culminated in this book on your screen, The Great Controversy, we absolutely know what is coming. We know the fine print in the book of Revelation. It's not a pretty picture either. That's one of the reasons we sought to bring this book before the world in 1990.
I think the magazine has always had an ear to the marketplace and an ear to the reader. Today, the magazine not only is a successful magazine product where we have about 30 million readers worldwide, we have 24 million readers in the United States, and we have roughly another 6 million outside of the U.S. Time is read by a variety of leaders throughout the world. In this country, for example, Time is read in the White House. All of Capitol Hill receives the magazine. And you'll notice that in Washington, Time tends to have a higher concentration of circulation than perhaps in other parts of the country. The reason for that is because thought leaders and business leaders throughout the world and many religious leaders look to Time to get a sense of what's happening in the national dialogue.
As watchmen, it was our duty to bark, to warn the world about what is now just around the corner. Had not elements of the Seventh-day Adventist Church leadership effectively blocked us from running this ad nationwide, who knows what might have happened? Time magazine is so influential, so widely read. Congress would have received it, for they all get complimentary copies. The President of the United States at the time, President Bush I, as they call him, would have received it. The Supreme Court would have received it. Many world leaders would have received it. In fact, get this. Time circulation is such that Osama bin Laden himself might have been exposed to it. Let me say that again. This ad, these 6 pages, all right? Had it not run up against the same forces that butchered the Great Controversy and gave us the Great Hope, might have changed the course of history. Had this ad run in 1990, had God had his way then, 9/11 may never have happened. For Islam, with our eyes now open to events predicted to take place before the return of Jesus, might have taken a completely different course. Do you know what that means? In the sight of Almighty God, the blood of all who perished in 9/11, plus the blood of all who died on the battlefield in its aftermath, might be required at the hands of those in the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church who effectively blocked this ad from coming before the masses. Why do I say this? Well, let's look at what this ad had to say about Islam. I'll read it for you. The headline is, America repudiating her Constitution. I was shown America repudiating her Constitution and the bloodbath that followed. Religious persecution in America? In 1888, Ellen White predicted that politically active Christians would succeed in changing America's Constitution and in securing a law enforcing Sunday observance. In her monumental book, The Great Controversy, she writes, "It will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced." Sunday observance, she said, shall be enforced by law. And what of those who dissent? What of the Muslim, the Jew, the atheist? All who refuse compliance will be visited with civil penalties, she writes, and it will finally be declared that they are deserving of death. You don't think this would have caught Muslim attention? It most certainly would have. An American Holocaust with Sunday sacredness at the center? That would have been fodder for debate in circles we can't even imagine now. Among other things, it would have lifted Ellen White out of obscurity and placed her in her rightful place across our planet as a prophet of God. Like it or not, Islam, with its false prophet Muhammad, would have been forced to compare the stark absence of the prophetic gift in the Quran with the abundance and accuracy of the prophecies and the writings of Mrs. White. That's what the brethren blocked. That's what the brethren will have to answer for before Almighty God. Aside from our obvious desire to introduce Ellen White and this book, her classic Great Controversy, to the world, what else motivated us? I'll tell you. I simply couldn't understand the silence of this church that had so wonderfully opened my eyes. How could you have something so potent and sit on it? At the time, I wasn't thinking infiltration. I'd confined my thoughts, my comments to unbelief and laziness, to riches having made the church soft and fat. And that's why I went straight to the top of this church with my concerns. How can we be so quiet? Let me tell you something. In September 17th, 1981, I said it already, there was an article in the Review in which the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the author Warren Johns said that if the church were put in the Fortune 500, we would rank in the top 50. Well, I asked for and received an appointment with the editor for the church's magazine, the Review, Kenneth Wood. I traveled to Washington, met him in the vaults. He took me behind, closed doors into the vaults of the White Estate. And I discussed it with him. Elder Wood, this article came out in the paper that you are editor for. How can our church be so quiet? You claim there is, or the article claimed that if we were put in the Fortune 500 top, we would rank in the top 50. How can we have all this money and be so quiet? And, he tried to poo-poo the notion of the wealth of the church. And I had to tell him, Elder Wood, you're not talking to a fool. You don't get into the Fortune 500 top 50 with a few $1 million. You're talking billions here, okay? And at which point he broke down and started to tell me about this account and that account, even stuff that I didn't know, And, basically said, Brother Mould, I'm sure if the church believed as you believed, we would take some of this money out and put it to evangelism. Well, it wasn't until the next day that it finally hit me. What was he saying? Elder Mould, Brother Mould, sorry. We don't believe as you believe. Now, I know I believe what I've read in Great Controversy. If anybody has changed, it's not me, it's them. Second meeting I had, because I wasn't satisfied with the answers of Elder Wood, I was given an audience to meet with the president of the North American Division, Elder Bradford, along with the regional conference presidents aboard the Queen Mary. And there I raised the same issues. Well, you'll find out what happened in the sermon later on, but the bottom line was I was taken for a complete fool. I actually thought they were going to respond when Elder Bradford promised to respond, and they didn't. I was given the audience, but when you look patting a little puppy, and that's how I felt, that they were patting me as a little puppy. Nice little boy, now go about your business. That's basically what happened. In other words, going to the top, going to the leadership of the church got me nowhere. All right, now I'll tell you another story. In the middle of our campaign to raise the $850,000, because that's what Time magazine wanted for these 6 pages, Time was charging us that amount, we got a phone call. There was a physician on the other end. He had seen the ad, liked it, and wanted to support it. He said, I have $300,000 for you. Bear in mind, we started our campaign with 0. The goal before me was to raise $850,000, but it didn't frighten me. I serve a God who is bigger than $850,000. As a friend of mine says, there's a verse that says, the cattle on 1,000 hills are the Lord. And he also adds, oh, by the way, David, the hills are his also. So $850,000 didn't frighten me. But there were $300,000 dangling in front of me. The trouble is my brother's offer came with a little string. Now, he said he never intended it that way. But what he asked me to do, he asked me to pray. And I've already shared this in other venues. He asked about the prominence we had given to Sister White. I commissioned that portrait. He asked me to pray about the prominence given to her. Now, quick as a flash, I told him no, I wasn't going to pray because I had no intention of changing the ad. That's $300,000 dangling in front of my nose. We needed $850. The man was going a third of the way. He said he would give us $150 and loan us $150. And evidently what he was saying was, as the book sold, we could pay him back 150,000. But I wouldn't pray. I wouldn't pray because I'm not for sale. I have my weaknesses, okay? But money is not one of them. I don't covet. I wear the same shoes today that I had 5 years ago, okay? I wear the same suit. I'd like to show you some of the stitches the suit had, but you can't see it on TV. All right? I have no desire for worldly fame, aggrandizement, or whatever. Okay? And it dawned on me that this gentleman who said he wanted to partner with us, what he didn't want to partner. He wanted control. And I, of course, declined his offer. He went away for a year, but he came back a year later. And this time around, there were no strings. He asked me my needs, and I told him that how much we needed to pay. I think it was Channel 9 in Orlando, $20-something thousand, and Arcata Graphics up in Tennessee, about another 20-something or 30, whatever it was. He wired the money. Simple as that. But this time there were no strings. And I think it took him all that time to get it into his head. This Negro will not be bought. Will not be bought. Of course we needed money. But in the way it was being used that day, I would have felt like a whore if I had taken it. Now I hope I'm not offending some of you by using that word. It's in the Bible. I think I can use Bible words, okay. And then came the blitz across the North American division to wipe us out. You know, in the end, we could only afford to run our ad in the state of Indiana. If you look at the magazine today, you don't know that it only ran in Indiana, but Time is so sophisticated that they placed the ad just in one state. And we chose Indiana to coincide with the General Conference session being held there that July, so that people would know that I was not lying when I told them Time magazine had agreed to run the ad. Because the church had come out, people in Washington called me and told me they heard on the radio that the church had said Time magazine had assured them the ad would not run. That's how far this church will go, to block the light of God getting out. Okay? And of course I told my Time magazine rep, and he jumped on a plane, went to New York, met with the top brass of Time magazine. He was in Atlanta. And he came back, Time magazine reversed themselves. The ad could run. And then they told me, by the way, what your church just tried to do to you was tantamount to GM trying to block a Ford ad. But it was too late. I'd been slandered all over North America. Stop payment after stop payment got put on checks. And of course, David Mould came out stinking to high heaven. But having said all of that, I think you can better understand what I'm about to say today. These magazines mean the world to me. 24 years ago, we put away several hundred of them, not knowing why, but suspecting that the day would come when God would use them to help finish his work. Well, that day has come. No, I'm not going to give them away today, but I'll give one to each of you who choose to partner with us by giving a minimum gift of $100 to our ministry. It will be first come, first serve. What happens if you send $500 or $1,000 or $10,000 or $100,000? We're limiting our offer to 2 copies per family. That way more and more people can have access to them as witnessing tools. I think that's fair. When we run out of them, we'll announce it at our website or when we're running low. With the funds thus raised, we'll be able to go forward with our quest to introduce the book on your screen to Islam. That's great controversy. New Illustrated Great Controversy. I'll tell you now, those efforts, the effort to introduce Islam to the great controversy, involve another ad, far more potent than the first one. An ad that I believe will win millions of Muslims and non-Muslims to the Lord Jesus Christ and his testimony, the spirit of prophecy. Come partner with us today. Help us bring the spirit of prophecy before the world. I look forward to hearing from you.